This video is sponsored by Lost in Cult. The castle grounds are littered with dead trees, some eerily adorned with contorted facial expressions settled into their bark. The interior of the castle itself offers little more in ways of welcome. Its strange statues and paintings hanging from the walls lit only by dim candles and streaks of moonlight. Deeper within this isolated place lurks a hauntingly empty dining hall perfectly laid out for its non-existent guests, sharing its suffocating stillness with the other rooms. That is, of course, when there aren't any hostile creatures prowling around. This isn't a Resident Evil game I'm describing. This is Piglet's big game. Like me, you probably saw this game making the rounds on social media, first popping up onto my feed because of its Silent Hill-esque soundtrack. It's more than just slightly similar in sound, as it uses the same sample that the actual Silent Hill 2 remake features in Chthonic Symphony. From there on out, I've seen clips appearing on my timeline about the game's horror elements, spawning all kinds of memes and edits that made me and many others all the more puzzled as to what this game is even about. I watched the movie that this 2003 title was created for when I was a kid, and I do not remember there being anything remotely scary in it that would warrant a horror experience. So, in order to answer the question of is Piglet's big game Silent Hill for kids and why, I had to play it and find out for myself. Being as enamoured with horror games and development history as I am, I always love discovering interviews and essays on all kinds of titles from the well-known to the more obscure, especially when they're presented in a physical format. Today's sponsor Lost in Cult specialises in that, with their latest launch being Make Us Whole, The History of Dead Space. It's a comprehensive book on the iconic sci-fi horror series that covers not only the games, but the movies, comics, and other projects that spawned from it, as well as coverage on pre-release prototypes and candid interviews with the franchise's creators. It's all packaged within a gorgeous hardcover format that will look great on your shelf or coffee table, which is something I can seriously appreciate as an owner of multiple Lost in Cult books. And The History of Dead Space comes in standard and signed editions with an exclusive A5 art card, which is available until pre-orders close on December 31st. There's also another book called Mansion, which is filled with writing on dozens of games in the genre, including Resident Evil, Clock Tower, Haunting Ground, and so much more. You'll even see my name in there too, as I was fortunate enough to interview Yoshiro Kimura on the making of the cult classic survival horror title Rule of Rose. So be sure to check that out too if you'd like to read my piece. You can get more information on these books using the link in the description, and get 5% off across the site until December 31st by using my discount code EuroThugSpace. A big thank you to Lost in Cult for sponsoring this video. The game begins on the first day of autumn, and the beloved characters of the 100 Acre Wood are peacefully going about their day. As Piglet strolls around, he spots a shadow emerging from a nearby bush and runs away in a panic, before bumping into Christopher Robin. He attempts to instill some courage into the frightened Piglet, telling him to face his fears and unleash his inner hero. But Piglet isn't convinced, saying that heroes are big and brave, not small and afraid like he is. Not long afterwards, as a few of his friends have fallen asleep, no one notices as Piglet sulks off into the distance like a complete and total loser. After this introductory scene, I was given control of the cowardly pink protagonist in a contained, cozy kind of area that you'd expect from the game. Once I approached the two interactable objects in front of me, I realised that this wasn't a level, but rather a menu for loading or starting a new game. After I selected the latter, I was introduced to yet another closed area that serves as an options menu with things like volume and screen centering contextualized by frogs and a target board. There's even a rumble feature that's represented by a contraption that you can turn on and off. I was seriously surprised by the detail I was seeing already, and moved on to the third and final part of this hub world. Immediately, I noticed that this place offered me the ability to watch animated clips and cutscenes, and following the middle path up a small hill, I found myself standing next to a telescope. Interacting with it brought me to the level select screen where a narrator explains that by entering his friend's dreams, Piglet can become the hero of their dream world. The first level takes place in the mind of Winnie the Pooh, whose insatiable hunger created a candy-filled landscape with all kinds of sweet treats lying around. Speaking to Owl, Piglet explains that he came to Pooh's dreams to see if he needed his help at all. And boy does he, because we find him stuck to a mound of caramel. This is where you learn the core gameplay of picking up and using items, pulling old Pooh Bear out of his predicament and continuing his quest to find a smackerel of honey. Unfortunately, the pathway is blocked by a giant lump of cotton candy, but by using a nearby spray bottle to melt the obstacle, you can gain access to the building. Too lazy to do anything else, Pooh tells us to go on without him and find the honey. However, before he leaves, he warns that past that doorway are Piglet's worst nightmare.
Lumps.
Personally undeterred by the threat of purple elephants, I guided our porky protagonist through the doorway and watched him shudder at the sound of thundering footsteps close by. Once given control, I could engage with the game's combat system for the first time, which I didn't expect to be so unique. Essentially, once an enemy spots you, you're able to press A or X on PS2 to draw a dotted path between you and your foe. You're then transported to an intergalactic battleground where the Heffalump will move towards Piglet, and you have to press the sequence of buttons at the bottom of the screen to pull off making bizarre faces in an effort to scare off your opponents and turn them into a green bottle. The longer the path you've created, the more time you'll have to execute the number of faces you have to make to win. But if your foe catches you, they'll scare you instead. After my successful victory, I accidentally walked back out the way I came in, so I turned around to go back, but this time, the room felt different. When I re-entered, it was completely empty. I didn't notice the darkness of the room before, but now I couldn't help but focus on its stillness. The more lively music we got when the Heffalump was still here was replaced by the track that got me to play this game in the first place. The adjacent room is again devoid of any life, and all of the sound here belongs to the broken gramophone in the corner, repeating the same melody over and over again beneath crackles and hisses. The only other thing echoing through the room is the sound of Piglet's heavy breathing as he fearfully scuttles around. When we were outside, the bright, innocent Candyland was a lot more comforting, so the atmosphere inside is quite the contrast. It feels off, probably because the art design is so wholesome and cute, being a kid's cartoon, and it's now depicted in a kind of light that is the complete opposite. Obviously, as an adult, this isn't that unsettling, but I have to admit, I think as a child this title would have absolutely freaked me out. I didn't play it back then, so I unfortunately don't know what my exact reaction would have been. But luckily my friend GeoHex could remember their childhood experience with this game. In particular, this eerie starting point in Pooh's dream.
This moment really put me on edge as a child. I remember leaving that room in-game, seeing Piglet run in fear on the loading screen, and coming back to that room, hearing that song play again. It made me so uneasy and afraid that another enemy would come along and get me. So at that point, the fear of the unknown made me run over to my GameCube and turn it off. That was the last that I played of Piglet's Big Game. The next day, I gave it back to my friend and tried not to think about it.
Going through this empty world reminded me of a recurring nightmare I would have when I was a lot younger, whereby I would be stuck in a museum or shopping mall when they were closed, and there would be something chasing me. It's the feeling of being alone in a place that's normally bustling with life and people, with the dimmed lights and drifting silence hiding something out of sight. In that way, Piglet's Big Game actually perfectly plays on those childhood fears I had.
Looking at the game again, it honestly doesn't seem as bad as my child brain made it out to be. There are only a couple of moments that do seem surreal and off, but I guess as a child, you see simple things as more intense. This game is kind of like childhood, right? Everything that seems normal and mundane to adults can be extremely fun for you. But there are those moments, those little moments as a kid, where something you see or hear can completely throw you for a loop and make you feel intense moments of uneasiness and fear of the unknown.
Throughout Pooh's level, you'll solve light puzzles, like finding a candle to melt a chocolate door and drawing a swarm of bees away so you can scoop up some honey into a jar. Also, interacting with pieces of a puzzle, whether that be an item in your inventory or a locked cabinet, will prompt the narrator to give you a hint.
If Piglet were to cover the hole and conceal the hive, perhaps the bees would come looking for it.
You'll finish the level once you head back to your furry friend to hand him his favourite snack, and Piglet moves on to his next target, Rue, who needs help getting his ball back. The dream world here is honestly my favourite in terms of art direction, with everything being made from cardboard cutouts, with things scribbled onto them with pencils and crayons. After a brief stealth section and many more fights, you eventually manage to get Rue's ball back, which is then snatched away by a woozle. Piglet reassures Rue and tells him he'll go after it, but the door that the conniving thief hid behind is no ordinary door. We find out it can't be opened by traditional means, as it will only let you pass if you're able to frighten it. Something that is only possible if you upgrade the scary faces you make in battle, which aren't terrifying at all. Actually, never mind, that one's pretty disturbing. You're able to improve your scare factor by purchasing what's called a brave face by visiting certain devices spread out across various locations and paying in Piglet's preferred currency, cookies. To find these, you have to go around and kick random objects in the environment until they spit out your little baked coins. There's a set amount in each area, and if you find them all, Piglet will do a small victory celebration. The map also notes which areas have any cookies remaining, as well as showing a picture of the environment instead of a traditional blueprint-style map. Anyway, when you have enough cookies to buy a brave face, the curtain will open and another Piglet will turn around and pull off the new expression. It scares the real Piglet for a second before he goes, "Oh yeah, I'ma steal that one actually, it was pretty good, yeah." As soon as I had my new move, I ran over to the stubborn door in Rue's dream world and successfully got rid of this smug obstacle, obliterating its pathetic existence. A boss fight awaited me in the next room, which consisted of 3 cardboard sides with a woozle on each. And when I defeated one, the room would rotate, facing me with my next opponent. Something about this surreal area reminded me of something from a Silent Hill game, with a dreamlike closed-off space that defies all logic, existing in a void with no explicable connection to any other place. Piglet becomes Rue's hero and continues through the dreamscapes of his other friends too, assisting them in their various dilemmas. Each world has its own unique style that represents the minds of its creators, but it would be within the dark and twisted imagination of Eeyore that I would be reminded of the game's horrors once again. This castle is something straight out of Haunting Ground or Resident Evil, from its setting to its puzzles involving taking a key item from a statue. And it's here that I realised just how effective the sound design in this game is. I mean, you can play any horror game and drown out the audio with Katamari music instead, and suddenly things aren't so scary. In Piglet's big game, it's its haunting soundtrack, and the fact you enter areas whose silence is occasionally cut through by the noises of roaming enemies nearby. Coupled with the camera style, you're made aware of the presence of these creatures even when they're not in view yet, which is a common and intentional technique in the horror genre. As I fought my way through numerous battles, I realised a few more things. When you lose to an enemy, the damage is represented in the form of a panic meter of sorts, where Piglet's movement is slowed every so often until you restore his courage, with his distress being shown even during the loading screens too. While in this state, you're not able to run away from things as efficiently and risk being caught up close. If you lose enough battles, you won't get a game over, but it does send you to the beginning of the level, which can still be quite the punishment if you have to travel far to get back to where you were. If you need to replenish your sanity meter, you can visit the Christopher Robin balloons and get Piglet his much needed emotional support.
Everything will be all right, Piglet. To overcome your fears, you must believe in yourself.
Oh, thank you, Christopher Robin. I feel better already.
Combat evolves as the game goes on, increasing difficulty by adding simultaneous button presses in its sequences as well as increasing their length. Mistakes in battle can cost valuable time, so if you're not confident you can beat it, you have the option to exit the fight and run further away to regain some distance before engaging again with the damage you dealt carrying over. On almost every level, you're introduced to a new type of enemy, and each of these change the battle encounters in some way. The caped woozles can't be scared while they're hiding their face, so you have to time your last button press to ensure you get your attack in. Bee heffalumps move with higher speed but can be knocked back when you pull a scary face, and the tuber heffalump can wipe your sequence progress if you don't finish it before their move. Mirror woozles make the stage spin around, which can be very disorienting when the arrow buttons are introduced as inputs. And the sporty kind changes the button you need to input when they swing a tennis ball. On the other hand, the broom heffalumps can obscure the vision of buttons. And finally, the slot machine type hides certain inputs that you have to take guesses at. It's undeniable that there is a lot of variation in this combat system, and even I found it challenging at certain parts in the late game stages. I honestly don't see how most kids would have completed this title without the help of an adult. That said, you can avoid combat half the time by maneuvering around enemies, but sometimes it is mandatory to beat everyone in a given area to open up the path forward. The final level in particular is genuinely kinda hard, where you have to save all of the other characters in succession, and if Piglet gets too scared, it will reset the level entirely. As well as being unforgiving of mistakes, it also doesn't give you too much time, as opponents will eventually reach your friends and scare them, again putting you right back to the start so you have to do it all over. After defeating the final boss, that is the shadow creature Piglet saw at the very beginning of the game, he saves his friends, but this time in the real world and not just in their dreams.
And so it was that Piglet had become a hero to all his friends, and he would never again think that he was too small or too frightened.
While it's not locked to post-game, you can also revisit levels after you've beaten them, and even though enemies are still patrolling the areas, the tables are turned. Instead, a message appears on screen reading bravest of them all, and a clock in the corner indicates you have limited time to chase after them and catch them. Touching them erases their existence, and you get a green bottle in their place the same way you would when winning a battle. That, in this post-level mode, seems to just be an additional collectible to the cookies. Now that I've covered what's in Piglet's big game, I wanted to take a moment to discuss why I think this is in fact survival horror for kids. Sure, you have isolated, sinister-feeling areas and enemies chasing you down, but it's also the ability to steer clear of combat a lot of the time and discerning when it's actually worth fighting, since you don't always have to. Especially if combat is challenging, which it very well would be for a child. Only engaging if you have to is a good way to avoid Piglet being panicked enough to move him back to the first area, as this could mean making the player maneuver through a lot of heffalump-filled rooms once again. On the other hand though, clearing out your opponents makes traversal so much easier since there aren't any threats around. In the same way, Resident Evil's corridors are easier to navigate if you wipe out any zombies. Therefore, creating this choice between risk and reward, and adding further tension to the experience past just the audio-visual atmosphere. Once you think about it, since Piglet's game involves running around avoiding combat, especially in more open locations, what's the difference between this and Silent Hill aside from some desaturation, film grain, and a few heffalumps? The use of the camera is of course reminiscent of classic survival horror titles as well, but it's also the puzzles that are mostly the same too. There are box-pushing puzzles and having to find keys to open chests, and even when they're not the same as Resident Evil visually, they certainly feel like they could slide into that series quite seamlessly. Then there are the brave faces, which essentially act as a weapon upgrade. Even the way that you collect upgrade currency draws some parallels, like how interacting with random cupboards or bookshelves in the backgrounds of classic survival horror games could uncover recovery items or ammunition. And let's not forget that the panic system is a mechanic that is shared with Clock Tower and Eternal Darkness. The player doesn't deal with resource management in the traditional horror sense with limited ammo and healing items. However, it replaces that tension with its combat style, where it's not ammo that's limited, but time. I've seen people call Piglet's Big Game a Little Nightmares type experience, but I honestly don't see the similarity past just childhood visuals with a dark twist. And even then, they're on completely different levels due to their contrasting target audiences. There aren't really any shared platforming elements either, and any combat that exists in the Little Nightmare series is nothing like Piglet's. On a narrative note, Piglet faces his fears in worlds separate from reality, in the same way characters who end up in Silent Hill often have their own demons to face. The dream worlds themselves also have a deeply surreal quality, again reminding me of locales in the Silent Hill franchise. In general, Piglet is the perfect Winnie the Pooh character to center a horror title on, since he's quite literally known for his overwhelmingly anxious personality. He basically lives in a constant state of worry and dread, which is more than fitting for the horror genre. He overcomes his fears in that last boss battle just as many other survival horror protagonists have done in their own fights at the end of their games. All that to say, yes, I do think Piglet's Big Game is Silent Hill for kids, and at least one adult. Obviously, I had to know more about the making of Piglet's Big Game, and looking into it, I could see that it was developed by Doki Denki Studio, who were originally based in France. Thankfully, I was able to get in contact with the main game designer Pascal, who worked on this title, and they agreed to give me some more context on the development history.
At that time, Doki Denki Studio was already working with Disney. We had released 3 PlayStation 1 games with them. Disney was working on the film Piglet's Big Movie and was looking for a studio to develop the video game alongside it. I don't want to say anything inaccurate, but I believe it was officially our first PlayStation 2 game released on the market.
I was very surprised to see that the game came out roughly a month before the animated film it was based on was released. I would have thought that a licensed game would just follow the blueprints of whatever it's originating from, but it seems that in Piglet's case, things worked a little differently to what I expected for a couple reasons.
I'm not too sure anymore how everything came together, but I believe Disney didn't give us access to the film's content. They were very secretive, and that was quite common at the time. They just wanted a product to accompany the movie's release. All we knew was that it revolved around Piglet, so the game's story was developed by us, the game design team, as narrative designers didn't exist back then. We had a lot of freedom, both in writing and game design, and I think that was partly thanks to Disney's producer, Risa Cohen. She really supported our decisions in the interest of quality. When Disney spoke with the studio about this game, Marc Albinet, the head of game design, my boss, immediately wanted to make a Resident Evil for kids. I believe he even went to Disney to pitch the idea, and he must have been pretty convincing because they said yes. Since we didn't have access to the movie's script, we created a story centered around Piglet. It focused on his lack of self-confidence and the courage he would need to help his friends who were asleep and trapped in a nightmare. The horror element was tied to these nightmares that the player would need to resolve.
Thanks to the situation the developers found themselves in, and with the blessing of Disney, this Piglet horror title was able to blossom. That of course was only possible with the hard work of the development team too. And so I asked Pascal about their responsibilities on the game and any memories surrounding the experience.
I remember several things. The horror gameplay, which was completely new to this target audience, the hour of real-time cinematics that I directed with the animation team, the cameras in each room that I placed as best as I could to follow the action, and finally, the overly difficult combat, which I wanted to tone down but wasn't allowed to. The atmosphere in the studio was fantastic, and I genuinely recall a sense of pride in what we were doing. Yes, it was a kid's game, and yes, sometimes it was cheesy, but we still had so much fun making it, as if we were making it for ourselves. It was truly a great project. The game was very well received. It was considered by reviewers to be a very good children's game. At that time, many licensed games, especially those for kids, were rushed and uninspired. That wasn't our philosophy at the studio. We wanted to make a good game, even if the target audience was very young. I think that's why the game surprised people with its strong approach and quality.
Along with the PlayStation 2 and GameCube versions, we'd also see a Game Boy Advance port as well. This is a vastly different experience, feeling like a demake. But the core concepts still remain, and it is pretty cool seeing how it was all translated for the platform from the world visuals to the battle screens. There's actually a PC game for Piglet's Adventure too, but this is literally an entirely separate point-and-click game with a story surrounding collecting ingredients to make some soup.
Soup!
And this is because it was developed by a different development team by the name of Hullaby Entertainment. So yeah, you basically have 3 independent game experiences that all share the exact same name. I played Piglet's Big Game for the meme, but I was pleasantly surprised to find that it's a genuinely compelling title well deserving of this resurgence over 20 years after its release. I'd like to thank Pascal for kindly providing their insight on the game's development, and they actually now have their own studio that released a title in 2020 called There Is No Game, Wrong Dimension. I've been told it's better experienced without watching the spoilers in Let's Plays, so keep that in mind. I'll put the game and Pascal's social links in the description so you know where to go. And I'll also have a link to the full interview too, in case you'd like to read it. A big thank you to Lamhoots for the voiceover, and thanks to GeoHex for sharing their memories of the game. I used an amazing Piglet's Big Game remix by Thousand Eyes for the intro track, so a huge thank you to them as well for letting me use it. I'll have everyone's links in the description, and I highly recommend checking them out because that's a whole roster of talent for YouTube videos, 3D art and music that I just shouted out. Last but certainly not least, thank you to my patrons for making all of this possible, and thank you for watching. If you'd like to see more of my future work, please consider subscribing so you don't miss anything. That's all for now, and I'll see you in the next one.